My name is Esther. I am 36 years old, and the first time I slept surrounded by rats, I learned how quiet despair can be. They moved in the dark, scratching behind the walls, crawling across the floor as if the room belonged to them and not to me. I lay curled on a thin, dirty mattress, my coat pulled over my face, counting my breaths and pretending I was somewhere else. That night, I understood I had reached a place where dignity no longer protected you. Only survival did. I hadn't always lived like that. Once, I had a home, a family, a future that felt predictable and safe. But safety is fragile when it depends on people who decide you are no longer worth keeping. When my family turned their backs on me, it didn't happen in a single explosion. It happened quietly, through silence, closed doors, and looks that said I no longer belonged. That abandoned building became my refuge after I was forced out. A place with broken windows, damp walls, and corners that smelled of mold and fear. At night, the cold crept into my bones, and the rats came out, fearless, bold, alive in ways I no longer felt. I told myself I was lucky to have a roof at all. I told myself it was temporary. Lies are easier to believe when the alternative is panic. As I lay there listening to the city breathe outside, memories attacked me without mercy. My mother's voice telling me I had disappointed her. My father's silence, heavier than shouting. The words, "You brought this on yourself," echoing louder than the rats moving beside me. I replayed every decision that led me there, wondering which one had sealed my fate. I wasn't hungry that night. Hunger had become familiar, almost comforting. What hurt more was the loneliness, the kind that presses against your chest and makes you question whether you were ever truly loved or only tolerated until you became inconvenient. I closed my eyes and imagined warmth, a clean bed, a voice calling my name with concern instead of judgment. But the fantasy collapsed when something brushed against my ankle. I froze. My body stiffened, my heart racing. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I simply waited for it to pass, tears sliding silently into my hair. That was when I realized how far I had fallen. Somewhere between fear and exhaustion, I whispered a promise to myself. If I survived this, if I ever escaped this place, I would never allow anyone to make me feel this disposable again. I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But clinging to that promise was the only thing keeping me sane. By morning, the city light crept through the cracked window, revealing the truth I couldn't ignore. I was alone. Completely. And no one was coming to save me. What I didn't know then was that in my coat pocket, folded and forgotten, was something small and ordinary that would change everything. Not because it was magic, but because it would force the world to see me differently. At that moment, I was just a woman sleeping among rats, holding on to nothing but regret, anger, and a fragile will to live. And I had no idea that my life was already standing on the edge of something irreversible. I woke up to a cough that tasted like dust and rust. My throat burned. My hair was tangled with sweat and cold air, and my arms felt stiff from clenching myself into a shape small enough to disappear. The rats had gone quiet, but the evidence of them remained. Tiny scratches in the dirt, scattered crumbs from whatever they had dragged in overnight, and that sharp, sour smell that clung to everything like a warning. I sat up slowly, listening. Outside, the city was already moving. Cars, voices, a distant siren. Life continuing as if I wasn't trapped in the shadow of it. I reached into my coat pocket for the one thing that made the mornings bearable. An old tissue I used as a handkerchief, a cheap mint, anything small that reminded me I still existed. My fingers brushed paper. I pulled it out and stared. A lottery ticket. The corners were bent, the print slightly faded, and for a second I didn't remember where it came from. Then it hit me. 3 days earlier, an elderly woman outside a convenience store had pressed it into my hand. She had been shivering, her eyes too watery, her voice soft. "Take this," she'd said. I can't. I can't get there today. Maybe it's nothing. But you look like someone who needs a miracle more than I do." I had almost refused. Pride is strange. You can be starving and still feel too proud to accept hope. But the woman had insisted, and the warmth in her palm as she placed the ticket in my hand had felt like a blessing. I'd slipped it into my pocket and forgotten it, because miracles don't belong to people like me. Not anymore. Now, in the harsh morning light, the ticket looked ridiculous, like a joke the universe was playing. I laughed once. A short, cracked sound. Then I cried. Not because I believed in it, but because I didn't. Because I had nothing else. Because desperation makes even paper feel heavy with meaning. The drawing had been last night. My stomach tightened. I stared at the numbers printed on the ticket as if they might rearrange themselves into something kinder. I didn't have a phone. I didn't have internet. All I had was my breath and this small strip of possibility. I stood, legs unsteady, and shoved my coat tighter around my body. I walked out of the building into the cold street, blinking against the brightness. People passed me without looking, their faces closed, their eyes trained forward. I had learned how to be invisible, how to move like a ghost in daylight. The convenience store was 4 blocks away. Each step felt like walking through water. Part of me wanted to turn back, to throw the ticket into the gutter, to avoid the humiliation of hope. But my hands held it like a fragile secret. Inside the store, the air was warm, smelling of coffee and fried dough. A man behind the counter glanced at me and then looked away quickly, as if acknowledging me was optional. I approached slowly. "Can I check this?" My voice came out soft, rough. He sighed and gestured toward the lottery scanner near the register. "Scan it." My fingers trembled as I slid the ticket under the red light. The machine beeped once, then paused. A tiny screen blinked. "Please see attendant." For a second, I didn't understand. I scanned it again. Same message. The man leaned forward, irritation on his face. "What is it?" I held the ticket out. "It says..." He snatched it from my hand and scanned it himself. His eyes narrowed. He scanned it again. His posture changed, stiffening as if his spine had suddenly turned to steel. He looked at me, and for the first time he truly saw me. Not as a nuisance. Not as a homeless woman. But as someone holding something dangerous. "What did you do?" he asked, suspicious. "Nothing," I whispered. I just have the ticket." He stared at the screen again, and his face drained of color. "Wait here." My chest tightened. "Is it?" He didn't answer. He disappeared into the back room. I stood frozen, my hands empty, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to escape. Customers walked around me, annoyed, impatient. I was suddenly aware of how filthy I looked, how out of place I was in that warm, ordinary space. I expected the man to come back and tell me it was a mistake, that the ticket was void, that the system had glitched, that hope was still not mine. But when he returned, he wasn't alone. 2 employees followed him, whispering. One of them glanced at me with wide eyes. The man held the ticket carefully now, as if it could burn him. "You need to sit down," he said. My legs felt weak, but I remained standing. "Why?" He swallowed. "Because this ticket..." He paused, looking around as if the walls might be listening. "This ticket is a winner." Time stopped. My ears rang. I blinked, sure I had misheard him. "A winner?" I repeated, barely a breath. He nodded once. Slow. A big one. The words didn't immediately feel like joy. They felt like danger, like something too large to hold. My mind refused to accept it because accepting it would mean believing my life could change. And I had survived too long by not believing. How much? I whispered. He didn't answer right away. He stared at the screen again, then at me, then back at the screen. I have to call the lottery office, he said. This isn't something we pay out here. My knees buckled. I grabbed the edge of the counter, suddenly dizzy. A customer behind me muttered, "Come on, lady." But the cashier raised his hand sharply, silencing him. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. If this was real, if this ticket truly belonged to me now, then my life was about to become visible. And visibility is dangerous when you've spent months learning how to hide. I sat in the corner of the store, hands clenched so tightly my nails cut into my palms. The cashier spoke quietly into the phone, eyes flicking toward me. One of the employees brought me a cup of water, her hands shaking. "Are you okay?" she asked, softer than anyone had spoken to me in a long time. I couldn't answer. My throat was tight, my mind racing. Because in the middle of the shock, another thought began to rise, sharp and inevitable. If my family found out, if the people who threw me away discovered I had something they wanted, would they come back? And would I be strong enough to keep them out? The lottery office was nothing like I imagined. No bright lights, no cheering, just a quiet building with neutral walls and a receptionist who looked at me twice before offering a polite smile that didn't quite hide her curiosity. I sat across from a man in a gray suit who spoke carefully, as if every word had weight. He confirmed the numbers. He explained procedures. He talked about identity verification and waiting periods and legal steps. His voice was calm, professional, detached. Mine barely existed. "It's real," he said finally. "You are the sole holder of a winning ticket." The amount sounded unreal when he said it out loud. It didn't land all at once. It arrived in waves, each one knocking the breath from my lungs. Enough to leave the streets, enough to never sleep among rats again, enough to rebuild a life that had been burned to the ground. I nodded, signed where he pointed, answered questions with shaking hands. When it was over, he stood and offered his hand. I hesitated, then shook it, the gesture feeling symbolic and strange, like crossing an invisible border. Outside, I sat on the steps of the building for a long time. I didn't cry, I didn't laugh. I stared at the traffic and tried to understand how everything could change without anything around me changing at all. I was still wearing the same coat, still hungry, still alone. That night, I checked into a small motel on the edge of town. The room smelled like cleaning solution and old carpet, but the bed was clean. There were no sounds in the walls, no scratching. I lay on the mattress and stared at the ceiling, waiting for fear to return. It didn't. What came instead was something heavier. Memory. I thought of my family, of the night they told me to leave, of my sister standing by the door with her arms crossed, of my father looking past me instead of at me, of my mother crying without stopping them. They had said it was for the best, that I needed to learn consequences, that I would come back when I was ready to apologize. I never did. By morning, my phone, new, prepaid, barely used, was buzzing with missed calls, unknown numbers, voicemails left in careful tones that pretended concern. Word travels fast when hope smells like money. The first message was from my sister. "Esther, please call me. We need to talk." Need is a powerful word when you're the one who suddenly has something everyone else wants. I deleted the message. The next was from my mother. Her voice was softer than I remembered. "We were worried about you," she said. "We didn't know where you were. You're still family." Still. The word felt conditional. I didn't call back. Instead, I showered until my skin turned red. I washed my hair slowly, carefully, watching dirt and exhaustion swirl down the drain. I looked at myself in the mirror afterward and barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because she looked better, but because she looked awake. I bought clothes that fit, simple ones, neutral colors. I wanted to disappear into normalcy, not announce transformation. At a small cafe, I sat alone and ate a warm meal without rushing. The waitress smiled and asked if I wanted coffee. I said yes, and she brought it without looking at me with pity. Normal felt revolutionary. As days passed, the messages multiplied. Cousins. An uncle I hadn't spoken to in years. People who once agreed I was too difficult now spoke about forgiveness, reconciliation, second chances. They remembered birthdays, shared memories, rewrote history with remarkable ease. I listened to none of it. But one name on my phone made my hands freeze. Edward. I hadn't seen him in years. Not since the argument that tore my family in half. He had been the one who tried to defend me, the one who said what they were doing was cruel, and the one who walked away when it became clear that loving me meant being pushed out too. His message was short. "I heard about the ticket. I'm glad you're safe. That's all. No request. No guilt. No entitlement." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed back, "Thank you." That single word opened something I wasn't prepared for. Because Edward wasn't just a part of my past. He was a reminder of who I had been before survival hardened me, before betrayal taught me how to disappear. And I didn't know yet whether reconnecting with him would heal me, or break something open I had spent years trying to bury. Edward suggested we meet somewhere public, neutral, safe. His word choice alone told me he understood who I had become. We chose a small park near the river, the kind with benches worn smooth by time, and people who came to think rather than to be seen. I arrived early. Old habits die slowly. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, watching the water move forward without hesitation. I wondered when I had stopped doing the same. When Edward appeared, I recognized him immediately. And yet, he wasn't the man I remembered. His hair was shorter, touched with gray. His shoulders carried a quiet heaviness, the kind earned, not assumed. He smiled when he saw me, not wide, not careful, just honest. "Esther," he said. "Edward." For a moment, neither of us moved. There are reunions that demand apologies, explanations, dramatic releases. This wasn't one of them. We sat side by side, leaving space between us like an unspoken agreement. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he admitted. "I wasn't sure I should," I replied. He nodded, accepting that without offense. "I won't ask about the money," he said. "I won't ask where you've been. I just wanted to see you alive. The rest, that's yours." Something in my chest loosened. Respect can feel like mercy when you've been starved of it. We talked slowly about ordinary things, his work, the city, how the river always smelled different after rain. He didn't ask about the nights I slept among rats. I didn't tell him. Not because I was ashamed, but because I wasn't ready to place that part of my life in anyone else's hands. As the afternoon faded, I realized something unsettling. I felt calm, not excited, not afraid, just steady. Edward wasn't trying to save me. He wasn't impressed by what I had won. He looked at me the same way he always had, like my worth existed before circumstances decided otherwise. When it was time to leave, he stood and hesitated, "If you ever want to talk," he said. "Really talk. I'm here." I nodded. I know. That night, alone in my motel room, I thought about how strange life is, how the lottery had changed everything external. But one quiet conversation had shifted something internal. Money gave me options. Edward gave me permission to breathe. My family kept calling. Their messages grew warmer, then urgent, then edged with frustration when I didn't respond. Forgiveness, it seemed, came with deadlines. I made a decision. I rented a small apartment under my own name. No forwarding address, no shared information. I chose a place with light, with windows that opened wide. On my first night there, I slept with the silence of safety wrapped around me like a blanket. Weeks passed. Edward and I met again, and again, always slowly, always honest. We spoke about boundaries, about the past, about the people we had been when loving each other meant losing everything else. One evening, as we walked along the river, he stopped and looked at me. "You don't owe anyone access to your life just because they share your blood," he said gently. The words landed deep, because they weren't advice, they were confirmation. That night, my phone buzzed again. My sister, my mother, a cousin I barely remembered. I stared at the screen, then turned the phone face down. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. But freedom has a way of testing you, and I was about to learn that cutting ties isn't a single decision. It's a series of moments where you choose yourself again and again, even when the past knocks loudly at your door. Freedom felt fragile at first, like something that could be taken away if I moved too fast or trusted too easily. I learned to live gently inside my new life, as if sudden movements might shatter it. My apartment stayed quiet, almost reverent. Morning light spilled across the floor, and for the first time in years, I woke up without fear tightening my chest. But peace has a way of inviting the past back in. The calls from my family didn't stop. They changed shape. Apologies softened. Voices trembled. Stories were rewritten. According to them, they had been scared, overwhelmed, unsure how to help me. According to them, pushing me out had been an act of tough love. They spoke as if love had bruised me by accident, not by choice. I listened to the voicemails once, just once. My hands shook the entire time. They didn't ask where I had slept. They didn't ask how I survived. They didn't ask what it felt like to disappear. They asked if we could start over. Start over is a dangerous phrase when the past has teeth. Edward noticed the change in me before I said anything. He always did. One afternoon, sitting across from me in a quiet cafe, he studied my face and said, "They're back." I nodded. They never really left. He didn't tell me what to do. He never did. He only asked, "What do you want?" The question unsettled me. I had spent so long reacting to what others wanted that my own desire felt unfamiliar, almost foreign. I stared into my coffee, watching the steam rise and disappear. "I want peace," I said finally, "and I don't know if they can exist in the same space." Edward reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand. "Then that's your answer." That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment with my phone in my lap. I wrote messages and erased them. I imagined every possible response: anger, tears, manipulation, silence. My heart pounded like it used to when rats scratched at the walls. But this fear was different. This fear meant I had something to protect. I typed slowly, carefully. "I'm alive. I'm safe. But I'm choosing distance. Please don't contact me again." I read it 5 times before pressing send. The replies came quickly. Shock. Denial. Accusations disguised as concern. My sister told me I was being cruel. My mother told me family was all we had. My father said nothing at all. I turned my phone off. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was clean. Days passed. Weeks. I filled them with simple rituals, long walks, cooking meals I never had time for before, sitting with Edward in comfortable quiet, learning that love doesn't need constant proof to exist. Sometimes he would look at me with something like wonder, as if he were seeing me not as a woman who survived, but as one who chose to live. One evening, standing by the river, I realized something profound. The lottery ticket hadn't saved me. It had only removed the noise. What saved me was the moment I decided I would never again beg to belong. And just when I thought the hardest part was behind me, life reminded me that transformation is rarely complete without one final test. Because some people don't accept distance quietly. And my family wasn't done knocking. The knock came on a Sunday morning, soft at first, almost polite. I froze in the kitchen, a mug warm in my hands, my breath caught halfway between inhale and exhale. No one knocked on my door. Edward always texted. The landlord sent emails. Friends, few as they were, announced themselves before arriving. This knock belonged to the past. It came again. Louder. I walked slowly to the door, every step stirring memories I had buried carefully. Through the peephole, I saw my sister's face, pale and tight with determination. Behind her, my mother stood with her hands clasped, eyes already glossy. My chest tightened, but something else held firm, something new. I opened the door. "Esther," my mother said, relief flooding her voice as if she'd found something she had lost. "Thank God." "I asked you not to come," I replied calmly. My sister stepped forward. "We just want to talk." Talk. The word felt rehearsed. I didn't invite them in. I stood in the doorway, the apartment behind me quiet and protected. My mother's gaze drifted inside, cataloging the space, the light, the absence of struggle. Her eyes lingered on my clean clothes, my steady posture. I saw the calculation settle in. "You look, well," she said. "I am," I answered. My sister's voice sharpened. "So now you're just going to pretend we don't exist?" I met her eyes. "I'm not pretending. I'm choosing." The silence that followed was thick. My mother's mouth trembled. "We made mistakes," she said. "But we're still your family. And I paid for those mistakes," I said gently. "Alone," my sister scoffed. "You didn't have to live like that." I felt the old anger rise, hot and familiar, but it didn't take control. "No," I said, "I didn't have to. But I did. Because you left me with no other choice." My mother reached for my arm. I stepped back. "Please," she whispered. "We're sorry." I searched their faces. I looked for curiosity about my pain, for remorse that didn't circle back to themselves. I didn't find it. "I forgive you," I said quietly, "but forgiveness doesn't mean access." My sister's eyes flashed. "Is this because of the money?" I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. "If it were," I said, "you wouldn't be standing here." They left shortly after. Not with understanding, not with peace, but with the knowledge that the door was truly closed. When it shut behind them, my hands trembled. I leaned against it, breathing deeply until the shaking passed. That night, Edward came over. He didn't ask questions. He simply wrapped his arms around me and held me while I cried. Not from sadness, but from release. "You did it," he whispered. I nodded against his shoulder. I stayed. Love doesn't always arrive as fireworks. Sometimes it comes as someone standing beside you while you choose yourself. In the weeks that followed, life softened. Edward and I grew closer, careful but honest. We spoke about fear, about the damage love can cause when it's conditional. One evening, as we cooked dinner together, he looked at me and said, "I don't need you to be anything but here." And I believed him. I thought the story was ending there. I thought closure had arrived. I was wrong. Because the final transformation wasn't about my family. It was about who I became after surviving them. I didn't wake up different the morning after my family left. There was no sudden clarity, no dramatic shift in the air. The apartment was the same. The light fell across the floor in the same quiet way. But something inside me had settled, like dust finally falling after a long storm. For the first time, I trusted my own stillness. I spent that day doing nothing remarkable. I washed dishes. I watered the small plant by the window. I folded laundry slowly, carefully, as if each movement were a confirmation that this life was real and stable. Survival had once demanded urgency. Healing asked for patience. Edward came by in the afternoon with groceries I hadn't asked for. He didn't make a show of it. He never did. We cooked together in silence, bumping elbows, sharing small smiles. At one point, he reached for a towel and brushed my hand accidentally. Neither of us pulled away. Later, sitting on the couch with the city humming outside, I told him things I had never said out loud. About the rats, about the cold, about how invisibility had once felt safer than being seen. He listened without interrupting, without pity. When I finished, he took a breath, steady and deep. "I'm glad you survived," he said. "But I'm even more glad you don't have to anymore." The words settled into me gently. Weeks turned into months. I began to invest the money carefully, quietly. No announcements, no displays. I learned how to protect myself legally, financially, emotionally. Security, I realized, wasn't about wealth. It was about choice. About knowing no one could force me back into a life I had outgrown. I volunteered at a small shelter on the edge of the city. I didn't tell my story. I didn't need to. I recognized the look in people's eyes, the mix of pride and despair, the exhaustion that comes from pretending you're fine when you're not. Sometimes all I offered was presence, and that felt like enough. Edward never rushed me, never framed the future as a promise that needed proof. We moved forward the way I had learned to live, slowly, intentionally. Love grew not from intensity, but from consistency, from safety, from the absence of fear. One night, as we stood by the river watching reflections ripple and break, I realized something that surprised me. I no longer hated my past. I hated what it had done to me, yes. But it had also stripped away illusions. It had taught me the difference between belonging and being tolerated, between love that demands obedience and love that offers shelter. The lottery ticket had changed my circumstances, but choosing myself had changed my life. I used to think survival was the hardest part. I was wrong. Living afterward required a different kind of courage. The courage to stay present in a life that no longer revolved around fear. Some mornings I would wake up expecting the old panic to return, my body bracing for danger that never came. When it didn't, I learned to breathe into that absence instead of questioning it. Edward and I never defined what we were in dramatic terms. There were no promises spoken too early, no declarations meant to erase the past. What we had grew quietly, built on shared mornings and unspoken understanding. He never asked me to explain myself again. He didn't need proof of my pain to respect my boundaries. That alone felt like love. One evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the city lights flicker on one by one, he asked me something that stayed with me. Do you ever think about who you would be if none of this had happened? I considered the question carefully. The woman I might have been felt distant now, almost fictional. Sometimes, I said, but I don't miss her. He smiled, not sadly, not proudly, just knowingly. I stopped hearing from my family altogether. At first, the silence felt strange, like waiting for a storm that never arrives. Then it became peaceful. I realized that closure doesn't always come from final conversations. Sometimes it arrives when you stop checking the door. I framed the lottery ticket and placed it in a drawer, not on display. It wasn't a trophy, it was a reminder. Not of luck, but of how easily life can pivot when you least expect it, and how important it is to be ready when it does. Occasionally, I pass people on the street who look the way I once did, tired, invisible, bracing themselves against a world that keeps moving past them. I don't look away anymore. I meet their eyes. Sometimes I smile. Sometimes I help quietly. I never assume their story, but I honor the possibility that it exists. The night I finally slept without dreaming of rats, I woke up crying. Not from fear, but from relief. I understood then that trauma doesn't disappear. It loosens its grip when you stop letting it define your future. If you asked me now what changed everything, I wouldn't say the lottery ticket. I would say the moment I stopped begging to be chosen. I slept among rats once. I was discarded, forgotten, made to believe I was worth nothing. But I stood back up. I drew my own boundaries. I chose peace over permission. And when the world finally handed me something extraordinary, I was strong enough to decide who deserved to stand beside me. That is how I was reborn. Not through money, not through revenge, but through the quiet, unshakable decision to never abandon myself again.